we'll get started. The lights have changed, so let's go. So my name's Emily Sheehan. I'm a playwright, and I have the enormous pleasure of speaking with Andrew Bovell today for this session, which is My Playwright Crush Part 2, the first part being Elias Jameson Brown and Deborah Oswald's very charming conversation yesterday, they're both very crush-worthy playwrights in their own right. And so, yeah, I'm so excited to speak with Andrew Bovell this morning. So I'll introduce him first. Andrew is an internationally acclaimed playwright and screenwriter and one of Australia's greatest living playwrights. His work for the stage includes Things I Know to Be True, which was a co-production between the State Theatre Company of South Australia and Frantic Assembly in the UK, which was followed by a new production at Belvoir Street. When the Rain Stops Falling for Adelaide Festival of the Arts, Sydney Theatre Company, Melbourne Theatre Company, and other productions across Australia. The play was also produced in London at the Almeida Theatre and New York at the Lincoln Centre, where it won 5 Lucille Lortel Awards and was named the Best New Play of the Year by Time magazine. His adaptation of Kate Grenville's novel The Secret River for Sydney Theatre Company and Sydney Festival also had seasons in Melbourne and Brisbane, and Edinburgh Festival and the National Theatre London. And his other plays include Who's Afraid of the Working Class and Anthem, both of which were co-written by equally beloved playwrights, Australian playwrights Patricia Cornelius, Melissa Reeves, Christos Cholkis, and Irene Vella, as well as Speaking in Tongues, Holy Day, Scenes from a Separation, and After Dinner. And then his film credits include A Most Wanted Man, directed by Anton Corbijn, which premiered at Sundance, Edge of Darkness, Blessed, The Book of Revelation, Head On, The Fisherman's Wake, a co-writing credit of Strictly Ballroom, and then Lantana, which was based on his play Speaking in Tongues. The screenplay was awarded the Best Screenplay at the AFI Awards, Australian Critics Circle Awards, the Australian Writers Guild Awards. So Andrew Bovell, and I feel like that's just a wave of all of it. Thank you so much for joining me as an extremely crush-worthy playwright this morning.
I'm blushing.
So the premise of today, My Playwright Crush. So rather than shy away from the, very cringy schoolyard vibes of outing myself as having a writer crush on you, I just thought we could run straight at those cringe vibes and just set the scene with some classic speed dating questions, which I've, of course, I've adapted them to be writer appropriate. If you're up for it.
I'm absolutely up for it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So.
Nobody's had a crush on me since I was 15. I'm overwhelmed.
Well, it's a first date, so we'll go slow. So, in terms of playwriting, or writing in general, your craft, what do you prefer? Coffee or wine?
Oh, an impossible choice. Because coffee in the morning, wine in the evening.
And you write at both times?
Oh, no, sorry. Once the wine comes out, no more writing.
All right, so you're a coffee writing
yeah, definitely coffee,
kind of guy.
yeah.
Okay, great. Early morning or late night?
Early morning now. Once it used to be late night, but no, morning.
Okay.
I'm great in the morning.
Great, good to know. Do you get dressed or do you stay in your tracky pants?
No, I get dressed.
Okay.
Maybe if I've got a new pair of tracky pants, I might wear them to work.
Nice.
But no, I try and get dressed.
Yeah, during COVID, I wanted to take my writing much more seriously, and I just bought lots more leggings. And I was like, great, I've got all my work outfits ready to go. Okay, a busy, bustling cafe or a quiet bush retreat?
I have a very quiet space. Again, young, I love to be in a cafe in Melbourne. Now I'm old, I like to be in my own space.
Gorgeous. Okay, what's more important, the most perfect snacks or the most perfect stationery?
Stationery.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, stationery, beautiful.
What kind of stationery?
I work with the beautiful black covered, the...
Moleskine?
Moleskines, yeah. So, and I've kept a journal since I was really young, same notebook. So
Really?
the stack is like that now, and I think I'm going to have to burn this one day.
sell them to like the National Archives. They'll buy those.
I might have been a little bit indiscreet, so
Okay.
I'm going to have to work that out.
You can put
honest,
them away, and some writer can
I don't want my
profit
kids
from
to
them
read
later.
Yeah, maybe, hopefully. That'd be good.
The next one, okay, loose guidelines or clear direction?
Loose guidelines.
Intellect or emotion?
Emotion.
Order or chaos?
Order.
A laptop or pen and paper?
Both. Work both, side by side.
Great. Writing to a deadline or writing with your instinct of the internal timeline?
Without a deadline, I don't get there.
Oh, with a deadline. Okay. Small steps taken consistently or like one big binge towards the end?
Small steps. It's a cumulative process that you make discoveries every day and build over a long period of time. I wish there was more epiphanies, but small steps.
I'm like that too. I think the bread and butter of playwriting is just showing up, showing up, showing up, showing up,
Yep.
and then eventually.
Keep at it every day.
Yeah. Okay, optimism or skepticism?
Oh, I think it's healthy to be a little skeptical.
Oh, okay. First or second drafts?
What? The better ones? Or?
Do you prefer like new idea, I'm just going to get it all done in a first draft, or are you like, that's horrible, I want to tweak and see what this is and work on it?
First drafts, because you discover what the work is. Second drafts are painful. First drafts, it's fun.
Okay, my last question, which is the most serious of it all. We're dying to know, a play about ghosts or a play about clones? if you had to pick.
Ghosts.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, great. Thanks for our little get to know you session. I hope you've learned something new about Andrew. So I wanted to also start with something that I've heard you say in interviews, which is that your go-to answer sometimes when people ask you, what do you do for work, or in the foyer, maybe in a taxi, that you say you're a landscape gardener. And then when I was revisiting your plays in preparation for this, I noticed there's a lot of landscaping imagery in your plays. There's the roses in the backyard of Things I Know to Be True.
Yeah.
There's the corn in Secret River, and then the yams in Secret River, and both, act as markers of time and change. And I would just love you to speak to and maybe unpack why landscape gardening. Why does this metaphor compel you? What is it about nature that speaks to you metaphorically?
Landscape, it's a way of avoiding, because if you declare yourself a writer, that story, you're in a cab and someone says, what do you do? And you go, I'm a writer. And they say, oh, really, what do you write? And you go, well, I write theatre. And they kind of go, oh, well, they have no relationship to theatre. So then you end up feeling compelled to go, oh, I also write films. And they go, oh, great, so what films have you written? And then you say the films you've written and they kind of haven't seen any of them. So it's kind of a humiliating process. So I did just start saying, I'm a landscape gardener. And then one day I did that and a taxi driver shot back, so am I. And then wanted to have a really in-depth conversation about what my influences were as a landscape gardener. So I'm a bit more honest about that now. But nature, look, I've lived in the country now for over 20 years, and I grew up in the country, grew up on the West Australian wheat belt for part of my childhood, and that was a stronger influence than I understood, I think. The landscape there is very empty, it's very silent, and it's quite lonely. So I think, whatever imagination a writer has, mine kind of developed during that childhood in order to fill that space and fill that silence. And so I think I started to think in terms of story at that time, making stories up to fill my kind of world. And then since then, my latter life, we live on a farm, so I'm very conscious of the seasons, and I love to kind of map the change. I wasn't that conscious that I used that in my work, but I think it's a valid observation that I perhaps just naturally bring that to it.
Yeah, that you have something about your sensibility. You can see the metaphor in what you're exploring with humans and their relationships and how they develop. And
yeah, I mean, I think with Rain Stops Falling too, it was a play of contrasts between the claustrophobia of a London flat in a grey winter with the wild coast of the Coorong and that estuarine landscape, which, that kind of battle between land and sea. I became fascinated with that interim space, or that in-between space, and then contrasting that with the solidity of the centre of our country, Uluru, and just how powerful that is and how different that is, and how that impacts upon character. So, the Coorong really defined the young woman, Gabrielle, defined her uncertainty in life. It seemed to illustrate that. So landscape was a great kind of tool for me to reflect character. And as they moved to the centre, they kind of became more sure of what they were looking for.
And the structure of Things I Know to Be True is the seasons. Each child gets a season for their story.
Yeah, that's right. That's a play about... So quite often I look for a structure that reflects the content, or I allow the content of a play to help me find the patterns and shape and structure of the work. And that's a play about change and transition. So the idea of the cycle of life unfolding in 4 seasons, and those moments of change when one season becomes another, being really pivotal moments in the characters' lives, in which each kind of announces a huge change that they're undergoing, either through choice or by external circumstances. And it's also about the death of a parent. And my mother had recently died, so I was really grappling with that cycle of life, letting her go and understanding that life goes on. I think the very final line in the play is, "It goes on," something like that. And so it was very much, whether we like it or not, we lose those people, and yet we've got to get up the next day and continue.
And seasons are something you have to allow. You don't get a choice, really.
Yeah.
They move through our lives, and we move through the seasons.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the interesting moment where we're at now is we've always been able to predict what the season are. Like, we feel safe in winter. We know what winter is. We know what summer is. We know what the other two is. Well, that's changing. Our summers are becoming winters. We're in a period of uncertainty, and the seasons are reflecting that in their unpredictability.
Yeah, and you can't tend to if we think of gardening, the way you would tend to the land in winter, you can't tend to it that way in summer. You can't.
Yeah.
These moments in our life, you can't tend to them in a way that moment isn't demanding of us.
Each season requires a different kind of approach.
You touched on structure just before, and I had a question about structure, because as a playwright, you really are such a master of structuring, complex, interwoven narrative threads across different, times, and, stories that have audiences, piecing together, how do these threads fit? What is the puzzle here? And it rewards sitting with it and putting it together as you watch. It's so beautifully done in When the Rain Stops Falling, but I think you can see seeds of it in lots of your works, and even Speaking in Tongues, which you wrote 10 years earlier. And I'd love you to speak a bit about, just for you, your voice, your point of view as a playwright. Why does structure support you to articulate what you want to say, and how do you use it, and how is it allowing you to express your point of view?
Yeah, you'd know yourself as a writer. You're presented with an infinite number of choices, so you have to start finding ways to narrow down the choices. And I do that through creating a shape in which I have to write into. And that just gives me a border, and that might be a season. Okay, so I know that there are 4 seasons. There will be 4 events in the play. Structure starts informing the content in that way. So it's a way, one of the great challenges of writing is how do we organise our material? And I guess I'm quite methodical and quite mathematical and musical in my thinking. Like I map things out with extraordinarily complex diagrams. And one of the other great challenges of being a writer, I think, and engaging an audience is knowing what to withhold from an audience and when to reveal it. And if you can get that right, you give your audience wonderful moments of revelation. And also, I love the idea of puzzle because, again, it gives an audience something to do. Quite often, a play can be a passive experience in which we sit back and it unfolds and we take it in. But if you can kind of find a way to get your audience to lean forward, because they're trying to work it out at the same time as the characters, it's a more active experience. They're going to invest more in that play. And When the Rain Stops Falling was the most complex structure and the riskiest, because for the first 20 minutes, I just kept introducing new characters, new time frames, and people were going, I don't understand how any of this relates. But then at certain points, things start to connect. And it gives the audience the feeling like, I made that connection, I worked that out. And that's really pleasurable. I love that in the audience when I'm watching a work. And I go, wow, that thing that character did in that early scene has an answer in this scene 40 minutes later. It makes sense now. So I look for shape, I look for structure as a way to contain the endless choices. And then I write to a discipline. It helps me discipline the work in a way. I'll control it. But as soon as I set up a pattern, I look at ways of breaking it. And if you look at my work, there is always a moment of, as soon as the audience says, okay, I get what he's doing. All right. Then you look for a moment to surprise them.
Disrupt that,
yeah. And also to stop them getting bored and to predict it. And there's nothing better than a whodunit. Now, if it's not a murder, it's a murder mystery. Like, there's a reason we love that genre, because it gives us something to find out. But even if you're writing about less sensational subjects, you're still trying to give an audience something to find out.
And when you're structuring it from like a craft perspective, do you need to know where all the pieces are going, and then it's a matter of moving it into the shape that you had imagined? Or is it like music, as you said, you're kind of feeling it through and maybe you need a bit more stuff there, and it's more woven from the start?
Okay. I often use this image to help describe what I do, and I apologise if people have heard it before because I've used it in other contexts. But I think there's 3 stages to what I do as a writer. The first I kind of described as being a sculptor. So you have an image of what it is that you're trying to discover, but you have a block of material, be that clay or wood or stone, and you begin chiselling to try and reach the shape you think's within that material. But if you relentlessly just chisel away to find that shape that you think's there, without letting the material itself inform the process, so you might be thinking, I see the shape of a woman. So you're chiseling, trying to find that, and go, oh, you know what? It's a horse. the line of the sediment, yeah, or it's a house, or whatever. But the material itself informs that process. And finally, you've got your shape, right? And it's not very good, but it's a shape, and that's your first drafts. That might take you 3 or 4 goes, but that's your first drafts. And then your work becomes my work becomes the work of an oil painter, where you're essentially working on a canvas, building up layers and layers and layers. So a good player and a good screenplay, you can look at it and you can see the layers, the depth. And that's your second draft writing. If you know what an oil painter's studio looks like, it's a mess. So this process is messy. There's things discarded all over the place. There's paint splattered. You're dirty after doing an oil painting. You're covered in paint. Well, it's the same as being a writer. You're covered in ideas, in words, in fragments, in all the elements of what it is. But you've got to keep working that image, the play, the screenplay, until you know what it is. And then the third stage is that of a poet, where essentially the work of a poet is to express the most amount of meaning with as fewer words as possible. So this is your third and final drafting, where you're really trying to hone the material. And that's slightly different between a screenplay and a play, because a play is a more verbal medium. So you've got more room for words. But a screenplay is it's like a sonnet. There are rules. There are 14 lines. Get them right. So yeah, they're my three stages that I go through: the sculpting, the oil painting, and then the poetry.
I love it. That all rings really true.
Yeah. It's a good, useful way to describe it.
It's really, really useful.
And the trick is to know where you are, because if you're trying to be a poet, when you're trying to sculpt...
Stop giving me this clay, dramaturg.
Yeah, that's
I'm
right.
a poet now.
Yeah, that's right. I'm beyond that. I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's cooked.
Yeah. To know where you are in that three-part stage helps.
I love that. I have a question which sort of ties in around timelines for your work. Could you just speak a little bit about how long you spend with a text in that? And of course it will be different on each project, but in terms of ideation, in terms of drafting, development, in terms of when you feel that it's ready for some outside eyes, outside influence, what does that look like in your process?
I think I marinate things for a long time, and I mean literally years. And I quite often try ideas out in different works. They reoccur because I'm trying to find the right home for them. I think Deborah spoke yesterday about kind of cannibalizing your own work. And I agree with that. So, but I'm not very prolific. I'm not a play a year kind of person. I'm a play every 4 years, 5 years maybe. But they are then usually they're very resolved works. And so far most of my work has had a long life in terms of other productions or an ongoing life. And I think that's partly because I allow them to sit for a long time. I'm a dreadful procrastinator. I will find anything to do but write. And I put
what do you do?
Well,
what's the go-to procrastinate?
All those things like, got to have a spotless house before I can write. I don't care about cleaning other times, but, if I don't want to write, I'll clean. I'm a great gardener, walking, all those things. Amazing what wonderful revelations you have whilst walking. But I also lie on the couch with my hand on my head, going, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to be a writer. And I phone my friend Patricia Cornelius and I go, I don't want to be a writer anymore. Let's not do this anymore because this is too hard. But then once my wonderful agent, Kate Richter, said, you do understand that you're working, that stop beating yourself up with this delay because it's all working and it's true. I am trying to resolve issues, and especially in those early stages. But then usually I've got a director or a producer starting to get a little bit edgy because I haven't shown them something. And I hate disappointing people on that, I don't know, that Protestant work ethic or whatever. I hate being late. I hate not delivering what I said I would deliver when I would deliver it. So then I'll work like a maniac. And it'll be a great rush of discovery. I remember with Secret River just not knowing how to approach it. I had the designer going, ringing me up, going, I do need text to know how to do this. And I was going, but can't you just sort of do a
No.
design without
What?
the text? He's going, no, I need to do a prop count. I said, oh,
Yikes.
yeah. So I sat down and I wrote it in 3 weeks in terms of the first draft. But I did have a very substantial novel there. But so lots of procrastination, lots of marinating, and then intense periods of work.
Yeah. You said just before that you feel like once your works are out there, they go on to have long lives. I had a question about, that your plays do seem to be produced, again and again, and sometimes that's by major state theatre companies, and other times it's on the indie stages or community theatre spaces. Even some of your early works seem to have multiple seasons, and I'd love if you could speak a bit to, earlier in your career, did you have the privilege of, attending those second productions and working with those directors, and, did that inform your craft? Because some writers only have, the first production of their work, and then there's the pressure to create the next and the next. And
yeah. I kind of quietly say to writers, don't flood the market. Don't flood the market with your works, because as soon as you've pulled out your new play, they won't look at your earlier one, or they'll get excited by the glittering new thing. And that's okay, but it's very hard for writers to build up a repertoire of work over a number of years, and to get companies to engage with earlier work. And we're always arguing, hey, come on, we've got to build a national canon, a national repertoire. Let's revisit our work. And a shout out to Currency again, because Currency published After Dinner, a very early play of mine, and it meant it had premiered at La Mama in Melbourne, and I think without publication, it wouldn't have reached Sydney. No, if he's here, I think, no, maybe it was Speaking in Tongues, I can't remember, but somebody from Griffin read that play, and then went down to see it in Melbourne, or something happened, but it was because it was published.
Publication matters.
Yeah, and then it becomes widely accessible. Then there's a production at Black Swan, there's a production in Queensland. So publication's vital to that process.
I think it's one of our privileges, writers, is we actually have a text at the end. Like, theatre does go away, but sometimes there's a text, and that can be one of our strengths that we have, I think, one of our assets. I know sometimes we feel disempowered, but that is quite empowering, that it can have other lives.
Yeah, I agree. It's there available for other people to interpret. And I always try and very, very present in the first production, obviously, because you're still trying to discover what it is, and you discover that in collaboration with, the first cast that does your play are vital to its realisation, and the first director who interprets it, and the first designer. So much, you learn so much, and so then to have the opportunity to rewrite it and to make it a stronger, better play is so important. But then a second production, you can let go a little, and I think, and then by third production, I'm going, it's yours. You can really kind of find your own version of this now.
So I wanted to talk a bit about the themes that are across your works, and you write a lot about intergenerational impact and influence across a number of your plays, and especially how unresolved damage or just unresolved things can play out, especially in family systems, as a microcosm of the bigger world that we're all in. So in The Secret River and When the Rain Stops Falling and Things I Know to Be True, we see different kinds of inherited stories and versions of the truth and family legacy. And can you share with us why you keep returning to these dynamics and why you find them helpful to lead into?
The family is has been a fascinating organism for me. I grew up in a wonderful family that was full of complexities, and to a degree experienced quite a lot of trauma. I didn't. I had a great childhood. I'm not wearing my trauma on my sleeve here, but I saw it around me. I saw marriages break down. I saw premature death. I saw grief, I saw unemployment, I saw addiction, I saw alcoholism, all against the backdrop of intense love. And that's, so trauma set against love, I think, is a theme I keep returning to. And because I'm trying to work it out, you know, if I'm not curious about it, I must still be curious about it. There is still something for me to discover in what the profound things were that shaped me as a little kid. So maybe I keep returning to ideas, but I also grew up and created my own family, you know, having children and stuff. So it's an endless fascination, the interrelationships within family. The push and the pull, the desire to run from it, and then the yearning to return to it. That's probably me in a nutshell, and my work in a nutshell. It's probably time for me to not write about family, but try and find a way beyond that.
But I feel like so many of us have like these stories that just come through us, regardless of our genre, like there's our DNA in there, and maybe that's just a piece of your DNA.
Maybe. I think there's a kind of, I'm interested in how the past informs the present, and what is unresolved in the past, how that gets handed on to the present, and then if we don't deal with it, we then pass it on to the next generation. That's very much the theme of When the Rain Stops Falling. Using the idea of inherited trauma as a kind of way to talk about climate change, as, you know, what our ancestors didn't reckon with, we are now trying to reckon with now, and what we're unable to solve, we're going to pass on to the next generation. And that level of damage exists both in our familial relationships, but kind of on a global level as well.
In terms of like familial relationships, I also wanted to ask you about, you write really strong, complicated matriarchs in your plays, and your characters, you know, Fran Price and Elizabeth Law and Sal Thornhill, they're really flawed, but complex and wonderful roles, especially for actors to get to wrangle with, and I'm sure directors to get to stage that. In terms of developing these characters, do you draw from women in your life, from actors that inspire you and you want to write them roles? What is it with these sorts of roles?
A bit of both. You know, I'm sort of probably a bit self-conscious about digging too deeply into that. But the reality is I grew up in a house with a strong mother, a strong grandmother, 3 strong sisters. So the role models of femaleness and the dynamics of being a woman, and I was the only boy. I had my dad, but my dad was largely absent, being a man of his generation, absent through work or absent through being a little bit overwhelmed by the female energy in the house, probably. But so I watched it a lot. I watched these remarkable women negotiate their ways around difficult men in many ways. I also married a really strong woman, Eugenia Fragos, who's an actor, and she's been, you know, a great partner to me in life and continued to allow me to learn about strong, interesting, complex women.
Do you let her read your work as your...
Look, we've brought up 3 kids. The time to read my work wasn't really there.
I thought you were going to say she's seen it all. She can read my ugly drafts.
No, she's not interested. She goes, oh, please. She's an actor too, but look, she's done a lot of my work. She's been in a lot of my work, especially early work. So we've got that professional relationship. We met at drama school. I wrote work for her. She was in the first production of Who's Afraid of the Working Class, and the first production of Things I Know to Be True, and the first production of After Dinner. So, you know, people go to her and go, why doesn't your husband write you some parts? And I go, I have, and, you know. So, but look, she doesn't, our relationship exists somewhere else. You know, it's not necessarily in reading one another's work.
You were mentioning on Friday, we spoke briefly about how you're adapting Things I Know to Be True into a series for Amazon, and Nicole Kidman's going to star in that
Nicole
amazing
Kidman
role.
stole my wife's part, yeah.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask, knowing that she will be stepping into this role and that you're already needing to translate it to screen, and you're, I imagine, adapting it and expanding it. Could you speak about that? But then also, are you going to allow, knowing Nicole Kidman will be playing this role, will you kind of lean into that knowledge a bit and allow her to influence the way you shape this character?
Very much so. Nicole Kidman's, a remarkable actor, obviously. But I wouldn't have thought Fran, who's this very strong, tough, working class mother. She's a nurse. But I always imagine Nicole is very kind of refined and patrician, but she's not. Nicole is many things, and she's also a very transformative actor, so she can step into all sorts of spaces. Nicole saw the Neil Armfield's production at Bovell and fell in love with the play, and she initially wanted to do a production of it on Broadway, which would have been such fun. But then COVID happened, and all those kind of dreams and plans dissipated. But I had begun the adaptation of into a 6-part television series, and so I said, would you like to read? I've done the first episode. And so she read that and came on board, both as a producer and to play the role of Fran. And then Amazon brought the series, so it's been a whole process. But Nicole talked about her mum was a nurse, and her mum was very similar. She saw parallels there. So and she was also an actor that was interested in playing a woman of that age, a mother with grown-up children. So she was up for the challenge, willing to step into it, I guess.
So you're going to translate it almost as is, and she's keen to lean in.
As I kind of pushed deeper into the series, I couldn't help but having Nicole in my head, and I had to really fight that. We do
that in theatre as well. If we know someone's cast, they're just there. Their voice is there.
And that can be really useful sometimes if you've got a particular, if you write to the actor's best qualities. But I don't know Nicole well enough yet to I don't want to close down her option. She's an actor that wants to come to a role, not my notion of what Nicole Kidman does well. So I have to really fight that, be true to the character, and I think I was softening the character. You know how tough Fran is in the play, right?
I'm not afraid of being perceived as tough. She's comfortable in that.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And she says some very tough things to her kids. The temptation is to redeem, to find moments of redemption and forgiveness, and they're important. But I had to make sure this woman was difficult to love, because that's the experience of her children. And you go, well, Nicole Kidman's so beautiful and nice, and I'm sure she would be really great in this scene of forgiveness. But I'm keeping her pretty tough.
That's our experience in our family systems, is that they're hard to, people can be hard to love, but you love them. And that's
right.
That is true.
Yeah.
It's honest, it's truthful.
Hopefully. It's that contradiction, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I had a question about, sidestepping a little bit. I know for myself a huge piece of early momentum and growth, of course I'm still at the very start of my career, but has come from really meaningful relationships with mentors and older writers whose work I've admired and really been quite blown away by their generosity. And I'd be really curious to know if you've had mentors of your own, especially early in your career, maybe mid-career, that have helped you with your craft and maybe also given you opportunities that because of their championing your work, you had access to those sorts of opportunities.
Yeah. Definitely, mentorship was really important. I think there's two kind of older writers. There's those that are threatened by you and see you as somehow being about to replace them, and therefore they're quite dismissive of you. And then there are those that embrace you and welcome you and make room for you and say, come on board into our tribe of writers. And John Romerell was that for me, both at VCA and crucially during the Melbourne Workers' Theatre Days. But also I stepped out of college into this amazing company of political thinkers and artists, of which Patricia was one of the three principal founders. And Patricia spoke to the company during her keynote. And in many ways we learnt together, but they were very influential people. They were a generation older than me, or 10 years older than me. They were fierce about their politics, fierce about what mattered. And I was a little green and a little political. I had political impulse, but it was unformed. And they taught me about what matters.
They shaped the kind of stories that you wanted to tell?
Certainly at that time, you know, and but it was through their friendship and their company and the comradeship that I felt I was allowed to kind of test my muscles as a writer. So that was very influential, that period, as our 20s are, you know, they kind of shape us as writers, I think. I've had some wonderful directors who have always been very generous. Julian Merrick's here, he directed Who's Afraid of the Working Class. I've always looked to my directors to learn from them. Roger Hodgman at the MTC produced my work very young. He did a production of After Dinner. He hired me to do an adaptation of Gulliver's Travels. So I had some people batting for me, which I'm really grateful for.
Yeah, it matters. It really makes a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel that responsibility too. I really make it a priority to mentor others and to make that space, to be that kind of writer, not the one that's kind of threatened and dismissive of younger writers' work.
And when you say mentor, do you mean in terms of craft? Do you mean in feedback, in opportunities? Like what?
Yeah, advocacy.
Advocacy, yeah.
Introducing their work to people who can help them realise their work. A bit of craft work, less so now, because that's a huge time commitment. Actually really teaching craft. I do a bit of teaching. I work consistently with a group of Indigenous writers up in Broome at Gulari Media. That I'm very attached to that process because they're all developing processes. I go up once a year, or have, sort of pre-COVID, but I did go up last year. And I just love that world, of course, to step into the Kimberley, to step into a different way of thinking, but they are so kind of eager for the idea of craft. How do I shape a story? So that's been a really great relationship.
Yeah. Okay, so I had a question about, so, you know, there's a lot of rejection that comes with being a writer or any kind of artist. In fact, it's like non-negotiable. It's definitely happening. It's a piece of the puzzle. And I think an antidote to that sometimes can be to make sure, you know, when we do get yeses and we do reach milestones, that we make sure we celebrate those and that we tell people that love us that, oh, I've just finished this draft, or I've just had this yes happen, and to celebrate in some way. So I'd really love to know, when you finish a draft or you get some really exciting news or something gets over the line, how do you celebrate?
Oh, look, I never quite believe it. Like, are you sure they said yes? But they'll probably change their mind. Look, my kids once called me Eeyore. I went, what do you mean Eeyore? And they said, yeah, always, you know, looking at the worst, Dad. You're always, you know, you're always killing whatever kids you've got in your plays. in really awful, violent ways, or you're going around kind of with your head down between your shoulders. So how do I celebrate? I celebrate on an opening night when that connection happens with an audience, and I see that audience relate to that work. I'm overwhelmed with relief and love for that cast that have realised that have made that happen. And I'm also very awkward, having to... Neil Armfield taught me how to take a bow. Often when writers get up...
We'll take one at the end of this if you don't mind.
Oh, no, I don't. But he did say, take the moment. It's respectful to your audience for you to stand there and accept their applause. Don't shy away from it. Don't back away from it. Don't defer to your actors. Stand there and acknowledge their acknowledgement of you. So he choreographs his bows very importantly. So he tells me when I enter, where I got to stand. He's done that twice. And it's helpful and it's important because it is a celebration. How do I celebrate privately?
Yeah, I was going to ask about privately.
Well, the work's never finished until that moment. So you might finish a draft.
Go to like a great restaurant or...
Oh, I go to great restaurants any chance I can.
Oh, okay, great.
But it's not necessarily about the work, because whenever you finish a draft, all that means is that there's another draft to write until the lights go up on the first preview, or not even then, on opening night. So I never allow myself that moment. And look, I've had some wonderful things happen in my career, and I do quietly savour that, and I'm deeply grateful, and maybe I'll share my excitement a little bit with some very,
some Moleskine journals, perhaps.
Yeah, well, no.
Just kidding.
No. Just with people who I know who've been on the journey with me,
How about when your friends have wins? How do you celebrate them?
I'm very generous, I would hope, with my friends. It's very important for me to acknowledge their achievements, their work, to go to their opening nights, to encourage them, to affirm them. I don't have a wide group of friends in the business, but those who I have got, I cherish. That crew who we did Who's Afraid of the Working Class with, that group of writers, they're really important to me, and making sure I support their work. Yeah.
It's so important and beautiful when you get to see your friends opening night.
Yeah.
Like, what they've been through to get there. It's so special.
Yeah. And then you're terribly nervous for them if it doesn't work. If for whatever reason the play is falling short, it's at that time writers need a friend to find the positive, to find the way forward, because that's crushing.
Totally.
Yeah.
I think playwrights should totally flood opening nights, when it's a new work, because you're there for
on opening
them.
nights. Are you honest to your friends? If you don't like it, no.
Oh, sorry, for them, it's not the time.
No, that's right.
If they ask, I still think that it's not. I'm not a collaborator in that production, and I just want to be there as an audience and enjoy it.
Yeah.
But no, on my opening night, no way. I don't want to hear. I just want to be loved on. And
I know.
maybe I don't know if that's vain, but I don't think it is. I think it's okay to be yes, celebrate. We got,
Yeah, but
and then maybe feedback later.
Yeah, but we know exactly what people are thinking.
Oh, yeah.
So when people are going...
It's I already know, you need to tell me.
Yeah.
I felt that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So hold it back. I agree. And I have made that mistake of thinking I've been really constructive on an opening night and going, I don't think this worked. I can see their face fall. I go, oh, you idiot. Don't burst their bubble.
No.
And don't burst my bubble. Opening nights are pretty stressful for most writers.
Totally. We've got just over 5 minutes, so if anyone has a question for Andrew Bovell, please, we'd love to hear them. Well, maybe we get a microphone to someone. I just have a little one, which is titles. You have great titles in your plays. When does the title arrive?
Really hard. I feel I often wait till I've written the play. And when I've had the title at the beginning, I've got one title that I love so much that I'm never quite able to write the play because I don't think the play will ever be as good as the title.
I love that.
Yeah.
Actually, one time I got feedback that was so harsh and I had to do such a big rewrite. I just had to retitle the play because I felt so like, it's not this play.
Yeah.
So I just gave it a new
Or
title.
quite often renaming it's a good way to kind of give you the impulse to
Totally.
recreate the work.
Yeah. Or changing the font that you're writing in. I find that helps sometimes.
I find it hard to name things, and often my titles veer towards the over-lyrical. Again, Patricia and I laugh because her plays are called shit, fuck, love, asshole, whatever, slut, like one word, shocking, kind of arresting words, and mine are when the rain stops falling. Things I know to be true. Kind of sums us up.
I think we have a question over here.
Thanks, Andrew. Fantastic hour to hear about your process. Just a question about dialogue. To go beyond ping pong between characters, when do you sort of feel you're getting the character, rather dialogue right, or is it coming from just knowing the character really well or the situation?
So quite often, I always look for the space between what is said. So often dialogue frames a moment. This is more apt in film. Your dialogue kind of frames the moment, and it's that space in between that actually reveals what's going on, reveals the subtext, reveals what's going beneath. But I love writing dialogue. I think you've got to have a good ear to the poetry of the way people speak. My kind of tendency is to heighten, to try and find the poetry within that. So rather than to write pure naturalism, you try and find the bounce and life and beauty and poetry in the way people speak. And that often means, quite often my characters don't know what it is they're trying to say. And that's a very different energy to a character who knows. Then it's a very clear line. Even if you listen to the way I'm speaking at the moment, there's hesitation, there's internal reflection, there's a lot going on. So you've got to allow, a great actor will rise to that. Repetitions, mistakes, getting words wrong, taking too long to say the thing you want to say because you're trying to buy yourself some time to work it out. All of those sort of devices, for me, make dialogue live. And the energy of interruption, of argument, of discourse is really helpful. So I guess some plays, a character says something and then a character responds. And that for me starts to kind of lose a bit of life. And the most interesting dialogue for me is dialogue that's informed by subtext. And that is, people don't always say what's really on their mind. So you're kind of trying to create a sense that there's something more here. And that also gives an actor so much to play with because there's depth to that. There's what they're revealing and then there's what they're trying not to reveal. And that sets up a really interesting tension. Yeah?
Great answer. Great question. Is there another question? Oh, yeah.
Hi, Andrew. Just a quick question. We hear a lot about Who's Afraid of the Working Class and that incredible watershed moment. Years later, Anthem appeared in Sydney Festival, and I'm just wondering, in the spirit of not being able to put your foot in the same river twice, were there particular differences or learnings or processes that were different between those two collaborative works?
I think we were 20 years older, maybe. So Who's Afraid premiered in 1999. Anthem was in 2019. We also came together on a work called Fever a few years after Working Class. We were all much more experienced writers when we came to Anthem, obviously. But I think we very quickly fell back into the rhythms of exchange that had made the first production so successful, such a beautiful representation of our 5 different voices, the fifth person being our composer Irene Vella, who is as much an author as the four writers in the work. So it's like we picked up the conversation. But maybe we also had less patience for each other. We're a little bit more set in our ways, as happens when you're older. And yet our individual voices shone through. You know, Anthem it's a work we're hugely proud of. I think it really, like the first work, caught the temperature of our moment that we're living in. But interestingly enough, it didn't have that same impact as Who's Afraid. And, you know, Who's Afraid happened in the Trades Hall in the theatre at Trades Hall. It was very much an independent work based in the working class. Now we were performing at the Arts Centre, at the direct opposite, and at the key festivals. So the context for the work was very different. I think my answer is we were the same writers, and we tackled our subjects with the same ferocity that we did with the first work. But we were also conscious of that we were stepping into some difficult grounds around identity, and we had to really try and negotiate our way through that. How do we talk about this? Do we have the right to talk about this? There were big questions that we weren't obviously wrestling with in 1999. The politics had changed substantially, I guess.
That's our time. That was a beautiful conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for being so honest and open. Yeah, thank you. Great.